The trail is a metaphor for change. Although hiking, and specifically endurance hiking, is now a big part of my day-to-day, it's not just about exercise. It's about transformation. Each step is a movement towards clarity, purpose, and identity. But movement is one thing, sharing insights gained is another. As a U.S. Marine veteran, I created this space to help other veterans gain clarity, purpose, and identity. Let's walk this path together. This is Trail to Transformation.
Most people aren't broken, they're just dysregulated. Chronic stress, pain, anxiety, and burnout aren't mindset failures. They're nervous systems stuck in survival. I'm Leland Holgate, combat veteran and neuroscientist, and I created the Welcome Home method to help people rewire their nervous systems with breath. And to go deeper, visit thewillfulwarrior.com.
Welcome back to Trail to Transformation. I'm so glad you've joined us today for this important conversation. I'm Suzanne Jabor. I'm a grief coach and consultant, and I have with me today Annie Emprima, who is a metaphysical trauma researcher, author, and Army veteran herself. Annie, what would you like to share with everyone about how you ended up here?
I deployed in the middle of my deployment. I experienced what I will call a GSA, Grand Spiritual Awakening, while also experiencing what would later be diagnosed as PTSD. So how I got here is this breaking and birthing that broke me down into rubble, and then the journey in rebuilding that into something that was more meaningful and more impactful for others.
Yeah, I love that sense that we get sort of broken down into rubble and then we have to rebuild something new and something different. And I love the work that you're doing around the metaphysical piece, right? Looking beyond just the physical, because we know there's all of these other things happening. And we also know that our healing happens best in community. And I'm curious about what the role of community was in your journey from that sort of rubble phase, if you will, to now where you're having such an impact on others.
In my journey, it was quite lonely. It was very isolating. My civilian friends couldn't relate to what I was going through, and my military friends couldn't relate to the metaphysical piece. So I didn't really have a place to land through that rebuild. But what it did do was give me really good insight into how the nervous system is desperately trying to connect with others. It's like the mycelia of the universe. It's trying to find where it can root for healing, and that led me to building the framework called the 6 layers of belonging, and how when we are hurting, we bleed and ripple into the other layers, from self to those that are in our household, to our friends and family that we hold in arm's reach, to community, which is geographic and our affiliations, to nation, to our belief systems, and that belief system wraps around everything that we do, and it's how we see the world. So when we heal through the ripples, and everyone else is affected by that healing. But when we're hurting through those ripples. And so I saw how when my self component fell, and my household couldn't hold me up, and my community, my friends and family couldn't hold me up, and my community couldn't hold me up, how it caused this magnified ripple, which compounded the PTSD, because it was like find resolution, trying to find regulation, and in the reaching there wasn't a whole lot of stable things to hold on to. no enlightened witness, no containers that could handle the language that I was speaking. So then I turned
Yeah.
found ways to teach that.
I love that sense of, how our both our healing and our pain and woundedness, ripple through those layers of connection. And you and I have had a really in-depth conversation about that, which I know resides on your YouTube channel. So anyone who's really interested in that sense of, how do those layers both ripple out and ripple in and really interact with each other? Annie and I did an 8-week series where we dug into each one week by week, looking at grief and healing and how those layers really impact us. And I love that sense of feeling like, your friends and family, on one side, your friends and family don't know what to do with this part of what's going on for you. On the other side, your army, support system doesn't know what to do with that part. And so we end up feeling like, there's something wrong with us, or we're the only one this has ever happened to, or, all those stories that happen so much in grief as well, none of which are true. And the reality is, we need each other. We need, in grief, we need witnessing. We need people who can just listen to our story and listen to what's true for us. And I think it's the same in the kind of, wounding that you experienced and the kind of trauma that you experienced, where there's that sense of needing for other people to see us at the most basic level, that sort of seen, heard, understood drive. And I'm really curious about how you, both for your own journey and for your clients, how you help people find that connection. Like, where can we be looking? What skills can we be building ourselves to be able to really have that sense of community? Because that's a big part of the Trail to Transformation, mission as well, is how do we help veterans? Because you come out of this place of really intense community where we're all, have a shared mission, shared goals, shared training, shared everything. And all of a sudden you're out in the real world. And how do we find that again? How do we find that sense of connectedness and community and interreliance, right? Because that's, I think, part of what keeps us here and keeps us healing and growing and learning and just being human.
Yeah. I want to add a little bit to the witnessing, because there's a spectrum of witnessing. There's the people who witness don't know what to do with it. It's uncomfortable for them. Therefore, the person sharing can't fully express in that container. And then there's the enlightened witness that has a little bit more training in how to hold space for someone, how to hear a story without trying to fix it, without trying to apply their own story to it, without trying to manage what is being shared in that emotional container. So Alice Miller, many decades ago, coined the phrase enlightened witness. And the enlightened witness is one that can have empathy. They can sit in the story, hear someone tell their story, validate that person's existence, and allow that person to feel seen in what they are experiencing. And that is something that we should have as core skills in our society, is to learn how to witness somebody else move through struggle, rather than trying to manage, manipulate, or suppress it. So acknowledging that there's a spectrum of witnessing, and we should be striving to be more present in the witnessing as friend, family, community member.
Yeah, I love that. I was walking the dog. It's a few months ago now, and I passed this young couple, walking, and she was saying, "Well, like, do you know what holding space is?" And I thought, I kind of slowed down because I wanted to hear his answer. I was, so curious. And he's like, "Well, yeah, that's when you just sit there quietly." And I thought, okay, well, we could start there, right? At the most basic level, yes, you're just going to sit there quietly. You're not going to jump in and fix it. You're not going to tell people what to do, right? So really, yes. And, I love this sense of really needing to look for, witnesses with a slightly higher skill level than that, right? A slightly better sense of how to be empathetic or compassionate, or, really being able to hold that burden with the other person. besides just sitting there quietly, which is an excellent first step. Yeah.
That is where we start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, I'll take it. But there's some skills we can layer on top of that, sitting there quietly piece. Yeah, I love that. Really finding those people that you can I was going to say unburden too. That's not the right language, but that sense that you can just speak what's true for you, and they can witness it in a way that allows it to just have air and have some spaciousness and not feel so much like this kind of dense, heavy boulder that you're carrying yourself, right? There's something about those spaces where we really feel, seen and understood that just creates that spaciousness somehow, that really makes such a difference in our healing journey and our ability to then hold that in a different way.
Yeah. And to not wait until it is bubbling up, that it has to come out, but that there's sort of friendship maintenance or family maintenance that allow the ebb and flow of each other sharing things and witnessing small moments, the whispers, before they become these big roars. Because when it's a big roar, that usually requires a little bit more skill set. But the little whispers of I'm not comfortable with this, or I'm feeling a little tension with this, at the whisper level, when those are exchanged with the people in our circle, and it's equal, it's not just one person always sharing with another and it not being reciprocated. When we have that symbiotic relationship, it's co-regulating. Each person is contributing to the other's healing in an equal way or in a flowing way. And that develops stronger roots and connections with those people because you're growing together.
Yeah, and I love that idea of really listening and paying attention to the whispers, right? And trusting ourselves enough to trust what we're hearing and what we're seeing. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in your clients and in, other people when they haven't been able to hear those whispers and they haven't been able to find those spaces where you're co-regulating at the whisper level, and then you do get to that roar level, which is, of course, the name of your really fabulous book. Really listening for those whispers before it gets to the roar. What's the consequence of not doing that, of letting it get to the roar before we deal with it?
There's always a cost. There's always a cost with penalties and interest. So when it gets to the roar, now we need more services, more skills, more support, stronger witnesses. Everything gets ramped up. And I've worked with individuals that were very deep in suicidal ideation. Like they're spinning and like their spouse, their friend is trying to get them to the emergency room or trying to coordinate this. And I'm talking to them and it's, let me step into your energy, which is a capability that I have being a metaphysical trauma researcher. And when I step in, it's like being in this short circuit robotic system, like everything is zapping. And to pull that person down into a slow enough state to think, because we don't really, unless we've been in that space, we don't really know what it feels like. But when you step into someone else's nervous system and you're feeling this frantic, erratic energy, it's really hard for that individual to grab something to slow their own nervous system down. And we think like, okay, let's go through breathing exercises and we go through these basic things. And they do work sometimes, but sometimes that system is just swirling and it needs something strong to ground back in. And I am aware that I have a particular set of skills that other people do not have, but that really brought my awareness to how fast our brain can start spinning. And sometimes it starts spinning beyond a speed that we can regulate even with simple support. So everything gets compounded when we wait too long. And then it doesn't just affect us, it affects the household, it affects our friends and family. Now they're worrying about our well-being. And then members of our community start, and it just ripples and ripples and ripples. And if we can start to pay attention to the little whispers, we can start to catch things quick enough that our system can catch up fast enough and regulate, even in a way to be able to communicate, hey, I can feel this rumbling. Let me put some support pieces in place now, preemptively. And so it changes how we are experiencing the world, how the world is experiencing us, and how we are navigating our own nervous system responsibly.
Yeah, I love that idea of really being able to, this is a skill that you have that I don't have, but I love that knowing that it's about how fast our system ramps up, right? And how fast we get into, the spin and the swirl and the spiking and all the things. And I think, we've all had those moments where we realize once you get up to the other side of it, we realize, oh, like we were ignoring what was going on for us
Yeah.
for quite some time
Sometimes
and not listening to those whispers and not really kind of owning our own power and our own sense of what we need and how we operate best and all of that. And that really sense that we're not sitting in our self-trust and our own power enough, I don't think. And I think we're relinquishing that to all kinds of spaces. And I wonder, thinking specifically of the veteran community, how you see that play out for folks where, I'm from Canada and I have nothing to do with the military. So I'm speaking completely from the other side of all of the things. But from the outside, it looks a lot like there has to be a sense of, we are all in this together and we're following the chain of command. And that's part of what keeps us safe, right? If you're deployed into an active military area, you have to all be on the same page and following the same rule book and doing the same things in step with each other. And if that's not aligned with you on an individual level, and there's no space to be able to say, actually, I think this is a terrible idea, or however you might say that, or whatever might come up, it feels to me like the cost of that must be really high.
We don't get an emotional debrief. We get a debrief of like physical, we get a debrief on, we have R&R time, but when I deployed 10 years ago, my command sergeant major and the support operations command sergeant major, and then the sergeant major of my brigade, I was in a brigade unit, they're both gone now. I just attended a funeral for my first line enlisted leader, who was a command sergeant major of support operations in the brigade, SPO, and he was 9 years older than me. But he had been in the military for 34 years, which was his entire adult life. And he was raised by men who didn't know how to debrief the emotions, how to address the emotions. He was raised in a culture that was, suck it up, we don't deal with it now, that's a sign of weakness, crying. But if you just came back, like he had been in Cav Scouts, and they had been exposed to IEDs. So he saw a lot of things get blown up, and not necessarily man-made objects. Sometimes it was human life. And so when you come back from that and there's no emotional debrief, and everyone else is doing the same thing of just sucking it up, that there's a cost and a penalty to that. And in his case, he died in his 50s, which is far too young, but very common with military men to have premature exit of this lifetime. What we're not doing is looking at the implications of the emotional exposure and how that will affect the body and the mind. There's mental health support, there's chaplain, you can pray, but no one's saying, hey, where are you putting your anger? Are we punching walls? Do we know what to do with this anger, how to express it? Or are we just going to CrossFit for 3 hours a day while we're deployed or after we're deployed? We're putting it in the wrong places because we don't know who's a safe enough container to handle these soft emotions in a world where we're not allowed to be soft. And yet, this is a human reaction that we're ignoring. So I work with a lot of men that usually when I'm working with military male veterans, they're dancing around. We'll go through session after session about superficial stuff, and then I start asking some hard questions of where is anger sitting in your body? And they were never even taught how to feel their body, because when you spend 34 years in the military, you're taught to dissociate. It's effective. In the battlefield, you don't have time for feelings. That's not like we don't cry while we're defending our perimeter. So, but we're never taught to come back to it after, to feel into it after, to process it in the short term, right? Usually a lot of the support is coming 3 years after we've gotten back, 5 years after we've gotten back, 10, 15, 20, but not, hey, you just got back from a mission, let's do an emotional debrief. Let's process this in real time so that when we go back out to another mission, it's not stacking. And there's no one really training that. Not training how to keep it out of the nervous system, because if we can stop it from rooting in that moment, it doesn't grow into this big monster that is no longer manageable. We're addressing it in real time and acknowledging the nervous system and acknowledging the emotions and acknowledging what is going on. And that has a positive long-term effect, even if it shifts things in the immediate moment. So teaching people how to acknowledge when anger's sitting in the body, like at this funeral that I went to, I'm looking at all these men in their 50s using canes, all these men complaining about pain, all these men like, and me in my trauma research, I see trauma that was never processed from their first deployment, their second deployment, the third deployment, and they're like, oh, it's from jumping off of tanks. Sure.
Yes, and.
Sure, yes, and. Yeah. It's also from not knowing where to put the emotion, so it got stored in the body. And in many people that are struggling with suicidal ideation, especially at the 3-year mark after deployment, because finances and with the National Guard or Reserves, you're no longer in your unit, or 3 years after you discharge from the military, where your major life events have shifted. The coping skills have to shift. And then there's a spike in need. And that's a point that we need to be touching in on, and we don't. To say, hey, we're at this point post-deployment, let's check in on you. Let's see how you're processing emotions. And it's not a masculine, feminine thing, like, boys don't cry. What's happening is that when boys don't cry, they become men that don't cry, and they become men that can't feel. And then the mind then has to take all the responsibility for the circuitry, the neurosynaptic circuitry that's going haywire. And that's a lot of responsibility for one portion of our existence.
Yeah. I love so much about that, because it really is kind of a big scale version of what, civilians in the day-to-day are also navigating. And that sense of needing to detach is okay, because there's times when we do need to do that. We have to kind of go, no, this is not the moment for me to have a big emotional outburst.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we have to almost keep track of like all the parts that we kind of went, oh, yeah, not right now, not right now, not right now, and go back to them. And that's the piece that I think we're all missing. And it's just writ large on folks with those really kind of big traumatic experiences in the military. But for the rest of us, it happens with our losses, with our grief. It happens, in all kinds of circumstances where we don't necessarily in the moment have the skills or the ability to do the emotional processing. But then we need to come back and do that emotional debrief, emotional cleanup, and just keep the system kind of lubricated. It's like our car needs that regular oil change. We need to almost be doing that regular emotional check-in with ourselves to say, how are we doing? We are completely out of time. So I'm going to encourage you to keep touch, keep doing that emotional check-in, and we'll see you on the trail.
Imagine a world where every veteran finds a reason to keep going. That's the vision behind the Trail to Transformation Foundation. Help us make it real. Donate through the GoFundMe link, and as always, I'll see you on the trail.